Hello again, and welcome back to Around the Archives in Conversation. No Lisa today, so here's me, Andrew. Hello. There's Paul. Hello, Paul.
Hello.
And there's Martin. Hello, Martin.
Hello, everyone.
Now, we come to an important question. What have you been watching since we last spoke?
Do you want to go first, Paul?
No, Martin. Martin, you've written notes, I hear, as though you forgotten.
No, I do. I have a terrible thing. Because when I'm working on my other podcast projects, what I tend to find is the minute we've watched it and recorded the thing, it's like it all disappears from my mind completely. And sometimes we can sit there on a weekend and we've watched 3 or 4 films, and I'm sat there thinking, what was the first film we watched? So I did have to write a few down of things we've been watching recently, and it's been quite fun. I feel, in some ways, this is a good question to be asking, because this is now episode 8, isn't it, of these little chats we've had.
Well, hopefully, yes.
What?
Hopefully it's episode 8, as long as it records. Yes.
I can't remember whether we're 8 weeks or, because we did skip a week, didn't we? So it may be 9 weeks into, and you kind of think maybe we're sort of coming to some kind of conclusion. You know, maybe we may not have many more of these, because the world is starting to open itself up a bit, and maybe people won't have quite the same sort of schedules. So in that sense, talking about what we've been watching whilst we've been sort of locked away isn't the worst topic to have, really. And a lot of people in the world generally, or at least so we hear, have been binge watching. They've been binge watching all sorts of shows, and I find, I don't know about you, but I find that as a person who talks about television in these kinds of forums, these kind of places, I've not really been doing as much of that. And I just wondered really whether that was just me, or whether that's kind of it's because we do it anyway, we just don't notice it as much. I mean, my partner has signed us up for Netflix.
All right.
Around about I can't remember whether it was last Christmas or the Christmas before, but I find there's a lot less to watch on Netflix that I'm particularly bothered about. But she does a lot of comfort viewing, for want of a better expression. So she quite likes a cosy crime drama. So for some reason we watched all of Death in Paradise this year.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not you think it's a good show or a bad show is kind of, it kind of fitted a purpose in the same way that Murder, She Wrote sort of fitted a purpose.
Well, I forgot the name of it this morning, because I referred to it as Crime Island.
Crime Island!
Which I thought was a good name.
And if it's not been done, why ever not? Well, there's a very good spoof or short or spontaneous version of W1A. I don't know if you've seen that doing the rounds the last sort of 24 hours or so, with the cast of W1A talking about whether or not the BBC should just repeat 2012 and just repeat everything the entire year.
Well,
I'm kind of sat there thinking, I could think of good years you could pick.
Well, didn't somebody suggest 1976? And I would have been very up for that.
Absolutely, yeah. Although they had tapes of the entire year.
Although there would be gaps, of course, as not everything from 76 exists.
No.
I think a lot of Top of the Pops is missing from around then, I think.
Or unbroadcastable.
Well, that's a different matter altogether.
Well, maybe we'd all like to put that particular thought back in its box, wouldn't we?
But what about you, Paul? What have you been casting your eye over?
I have to be a little bit careful, because I've been doing a lot of research for Around the Archives articles.
Yeah.
So,
don't spoil those too much. No,
I think there are a couple I can talk about, because, one of them I promised at the end of my Twilight Zone article. So I've been watching Night Gallery, and it's one of those series that I own all 3 seasons of, but I haven't necessarily sat and got all the way through. Not sort of recently, and also when it was first shown, when I first saw it in the late 80s, it was shown late at night and chopped into little segments, and not necessarily the whole episode. So some of them I'm seeing for the first time, some of them I'm seeing for the first time in their right context. But but I've also been watching Dynasty, which I've owned for, well, at least half of it for quite a while, but got put off after watching the first season because I didn't. Well, I know it's not meant to be the most Dynasty type season of Dynasty, if you know what I mean. Yeah, I thought, well, I'll continue, and now it's kind of getting into fights in lily ponds and people putting poisonous paint on the walls of competitors' rooms and stuff so that they get lead poisoning and really crazy things like that. And I'm coming up to sort of like, there's been people being trapped in burning cabins, and I'm not that far from the big massacre and all that sort of thing, which is what I want. What I wanted to watch Dynasty for.
For a moment there, Paul, I thought you said fights in Lilliput. And I'm just imagining about like a giant JR or something, sort of kicking over the tiny oil rigs.
It might just work.
Yeah, there probably is a Lilliputian version of Dynasty somewhere.
Oh, Lego Dynasty. Oh.
And otherwise, I've been watching the new Blu-ray of season 14 of Doctor Who. Although I sort of I find it very difficult just to sit and watch, because I know the story so well. I find it quite difficult just to kind of say, right, I'm just going to watch it, because I look around my room and there's so many things I haven't seen once yet that I feel I have to kind of find a new way of rewatching my favourites. So yeah, I sort of perhaps I listen to a commentary, or listen to with the info stuff on the screen, or there are new documentaries and new bits and pieces that were on the previous DVD version. So yes, I've been watching that, and films, but yeah, as I say, I have been doing quite a lot of preparation for articles that I have recorded but can't tell you about at the moment.
Ooh, spoilers.
Well, Martin, I mean, obviously you by sort of nature of the podcast you're now involved with, have been watching a lot of drama, and some of it fairly heavy, I think, fairly sort of fairly serious stuff. So in your sort of off time, do you tend to go for lighter stuff just to have a break from this? Or
yes, I have been watching lots of serious drama. And I'm going to be talking about that tomorrow, actually, weirdly.
How far, without saying what series you're talking about, how far ahead are you recording? So what letter have you got up to?
We've got a buffer zone of about 4 episodes, but as they're fortnightly, it's they're kind of sitting along the. So we're just about to do letter K, whereas I think we've just released letter F, and we're about to release letter G. So it's. And we made a kind of slight detour into something a bit more mainstream on the last one, but I think now we're going to go back into something, an area which is I actually think we're going to have a more sort of wild conversation about.
Are you this is a question that I've wondered from the start. Have you once you've done A to Z, then are you going to go back? Have you not even thought that far?
Andy refers to season 2 occasionally.
I see. Yeah.
But the thing about an alphabet is you can do another alphabet.
Yeah.
The problem really with the alphabet system is you suddenly think of 6 things you'd like to do for a particular letter, and you can't. You can only do one of them.
Yeah.
And then you've got to wait a year before you can do the next one.
So of course, doing it fortnightly, that sort of almost fit. That sort of fits really. Doing a season 1, season 2. I hadn't thought about that. You see, it's always good to look. It's always good to look ahead.
Yeah, no. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, basically, we're at the moment we're looking at several Dennis Potters Dennis Potter has there's lots to say about Dennis Potter. I'm now scrambling around trying to think of any of them. The things I'm going to say when we record that one, but
I was wondering whether I'm allowed to say. Have we started talking about what the next Round the Archives edition involves?
What, number 49?
Yeah, series-wise, have we? I imagine we must be almost about to, because we're only days from June.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a cover for it, so I know what's in it.
Yes,
or at least I know the bulk of what's in it. I'm sure there'll be other things we don't know anything about. But
I just wonder if I'm allowed to say what I've.
I'm sure you can.
Yes,
I mean, it's all part of the publicity machine.
Yeah,
all said and done.
Well, next episode, I'm talking about Around the Archives. No, see, I can't get my teeth in. Next episode Around the Archives, I'm talking about Tales of the Unexpected. And I could just be talking about Round the Archives on Round the Archives. We did that. We did that on the Shy Life podcast recently. We talked about the Shy Life podcast. But no. So I'm doing Tales with Nick, and I must have recorded that quite a few weeks ago now, and it kind of triggered me into not going right back to the start and watching episode 1, but going back to about season 3.
Yes.
Watching from that point, because I recognise, I think when I have watched Tales, I probably have watched favourites either of, because I do tend to watch them when I go and see Nick.
Right.
So they're also, the Roald Dahl ones are very famous anyway, from if you've read them. So I'm trying to. I've been watching ones that I hadn't seen before, and watching those in season. So I'm still sort of coming towards the end of those.
You see, I've not cracked my box set yet. I bought one of the slimline box set from the supermarket a couple of years ago.
Probably what I've got.
And because apparently there's one that has like 20 discs and there's one that has about 10 discs.
Okay.
And I've got the 10 disc version, which I think has. When I looked at the content, I thought, well, it's got all the ones I remember. And then I try and work out, well, what are all the ones I don't remember and when were they on, and so I don't actually really. I don't know enough about the background because I'm not researched it or anything. I don't really know enough about the background of Tales of the Unexpected, in the sense I remember it being on when I was watching it on TV, and I remember the honey, the bee one,
the bee one,
and I remember other ones being on TV at the time. But the extended set, which has, however, I mean, it's about 100 episodes in it or something, isn't it? I don't know whether that was partially an American series, partially a British version.
Well, there is. I think with the talking about the American Tales, I think that's a question that still remains, because Nick was saying he would love to know what these American ones, where they come from, what the background is. Why it doesn't. It goes back to that thing we said about some series being so well documented, and some there being so many questions, because that's the thing. A lot of us Doctor Who fans who expect to know, we expect there to be lots of detail, are fans of lots of other series, and with those series we find that there just isn't the information out there, or no one's written that book, or as I think we said before, maybe we should write the book, but we haven't all got so many other things to be doing.
Well, I've got the set of the Channel 4 version of Black Mirror, but I've not really followed up on the new Black Mirror. You see what I mean?
The last few seasons have been on Netflix as well.
Yes, that's what I mean. So,
I think
I've not
up to date.
But that's again, it's another one of those series that was partially done on one thing and then will be done on something else, and we'll never really know. Well,
they when they do come out, they don't come out in swathes of them like a season of Twilight Zone or something.
No, I just mean sort of 30 years' time, people are going to be going, why are some of these not on my set? I mean, it's kind of weird actually. If you buy film, it's like the Hitchcock movies. How some of them don't come in the in the complete Hitchcock or whatever they call them sets, because they're owned by completely different studios.
Yeah.
So you want to track down something like To Catch a Thief, you have to buy it separately. You can't buy it at the same time, you know.
Yes.
So it's all very peculiar like that. And we were just actually getting into the area of film, weren't we? Which was kind of, which I know is kind of outside our brief slightly, but it is fascinating to me that like I say, certain parts of TV shows, because they were made by other people, can belong to other people. So sometimes you can't get complete sets of things in one box anymore, you know. And this is what happened with Hitchcock, but it also happens with things like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is one of the shows we have been binge watching. The later seasons were made by a completely different studio. You know, sometimes these programs, they get cancelled, but another studio goes, actually, or another network decides they want to carry them on. But sometimes in about 10 years' time, the rights issues will be a nightmare.
I don't know quite what happened. I guess with Get Smart, it's such an old series that maybe because the last season was on a different channel, and but the only time I've known it available for sale, it was all together. So obviously something's been sorted out a lot with that. But then it's such an old show. But
wasn't there something about that with the Bionic series as well? Didn't they sort of hop channels or something for the final year or something? I can't remember. There is. But again, I suppose, like you say, I mean, it could well be that I mean, for something like Brooklyn, it's probably because the studios are the same, the sets are the same, the actors are the same. So maybe it's actually, the production company are the same. So maybe the ownership rights don't get that complicated. But there have been shows that have jumped to networks. I mean, even over here, we've got things like Men Behaving Badly, haven't we? Where the first 2 seasons are on ITV, and then the rest of it's on BBC, and all this sort of strange and peculiar thing. Which, of course, ties in nicely with what I have been researching in the sense of the final Dennis Potter 2 series being made by the BBC and Channel 4 for repeating on the opposite channels. You know, that was a very strange setup, but but now they all end up on all 4 anyway. So which is useful for people who want to watch them, but.
I mean, I would say we're not in a hurry to go searching for the mythical 4th series of Mind Your Language. Because we've got the first 3 seasons, but the 4th season was done sort of almost independently. I think Albert Moses was involved with producing it or something like that. And there's a couple of the original cast, but not many. But I know Mind Your Language hasn't maybe got the best sort of reputation, but we're quite fond of it because, as we've said in our article, we like spending time with those characters. They're nice people. But yeah, the 4th series is not got a good reputation at all. So, and there's rumours it might even be missing. So, yeah.
But it always amazes me though that the actors who were in, the actors from different cultures, different backgrounds who were in a series like that. When you start watching a lot of 70s and 80s TV, how many of them pop up in serious roles?
Oh yes,
and it just sort of throws you completely, because you're so used to. I mean, they what's his name, Deepak from it ain't Half Hot Mum. Can't remember his name off the top of it, but he sort of turned up in a Hazel episode I was watching, things like that, and you just think, oh right, yeah, okay. Fascinating to me also how many of the crime dramas of the 70s were obsessing about immigration. Even then, it seems to have been sort of weaved through our culture for the last 30 odd years, 40 odd years.
But in terms of comfort viewing, Martin, I'd noticed a few days ago you'd returned to some old Doctor Who favourites, hadn't you?
I did actually. It's a very long time because I'm probably overfamiliar. And Paul was saying that you've been watching the new box set, and whilst I have finally cracked the cellophane on that, it was only to watch the Elizabeth Sladen documentary. I've not actually watched anything else on the set at all. And there's a couple of the early ones. I'm still waiting to tell what the next one is, but I don't think we'll ever find that out these days. It's kind of. But if you find out, let me know.
I'll put a pound on season 20, but I might be completely wrong. But
okay. Okay. But no, Sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say I had a feeling about season 11 as well, only because there seems to be a lot of stuff popping up and mocked up covers of season 11. But season 20 would be another obvious possibility. So either of those two.
I think
it's either going up from what's already out or filling a gap, isn't it? It's
11's a good.
You've got a 10, you've got 12.
A good call, but you've still got the Invasion of the Dinosaurs Part 1 problem, haven't you? So I don't know whether the colour recovery stands a better chance these days, but they were having trouble.
And they might want to do
trouble
new
with
CGI
the blues
as well.
or something, weren't they? It's not quite worked or some such. But Martin, you were doing what? Claws of Axos?
I started weirdly enough with Sunmakers. I don't know whether it was because of the political climate at the moment, but I really, really, really had this. I've had a yen for about sort of like 3 or 4 weeks, which again, so long since I just sat down and watched an old Doctor Who story for various reasons. Because like Paul was saying, you've got so much else you want to watch, and so much you've got to research and everything like that. To actually just sit down and watch an old Doctor Who is something I've not done for quite some time. And then last week I watched 3 of them. Working backwards, weirdly, I went through Sunmakers, which because I wanted political satire. It felt appropriate at the time, and still does. Weird. Not that I particularly want people to start throwing people off buildings or anything, but I just said, one evening I don't often get access to the main TV and watch something archivey, for various reasons. But I just sort of said, I really fancy watching one, so I was allowed to watch. So I got one of my DVDs out and watched that, and we were surprised how violent the Sunmakers actually is in terms of. All the cheering when people get thrown off buildings and things. It's a bit, actually, I'd forgotten that. I'd forgotten quite how gleeful they were. And I know in terms of the storyline, it kind of makes sense because they've been oppressed by this, but you still think it feels slightly wonky in terms of the philosophy of the show. Weirdly, absolutely, the bang-on, smack in the middle Tom Baker story. It's everything before, his first half, everything after his second half, and it's the one that's slap bang in the middle. Don't know why I picked it, but that was the one
interesting, and because it's also the crossover between Bob Holmes and Anthony Reid, isn't it? So, yeah.
I mean, you're into. Graham Williams now. It's his fourth, isn't it? But it's kind of it's absolutely that first season of Graham Williams, and obviously he has 3. Philip Hinchcliffe has 3-ish. And you've got the one of John Nathan Turner, so of 7, that's the halfway point. Also, weirdly, if new Doctor Who and old, if you consider them starting from the same year, I know they didn't, but we'd be about at that point now.
Good grief!
We'd be about midway through the year 15, which always bamboozles me that children, when I was watching Tom Baker. People who are now watching Jodie would their experience of William Hart, their experience of Christopher Eccleston would be equivalent to my experience of William Hartnell, except we never expected to ever see any of those shows. So weirdly, then because of a conversation I had with our dear friend Simon of the Exton Moss Experiment, who had done the same thing but decided to watch Claws of Axos. I had a bit of an online natter with him about Claws of Axos. So I got Claws of Axos out because I suddenly really fancied it. It has that wonderful John Pertwee not sticking around too long, absolutely prime Pertwee. Claws of Axos is almost the sort of quintessential Pertwee story in my mind, and doesn't outstay its welcome and isn't padded. It fits nicely into those 4 episodes. So I quite enjoy that. And then, because of that, I suddenly had a yen to watch the Crotons again. Now, I know a lot of people think, Crotons, but I actually really like the Crotons. I really think it's a great little story. I mean, it's got Bob Holmes, so, it actually matches with the Sunmakers quite well. But also, it's that first time thing. That was the first, because of the Five Faces series, that was the first time I saw proper Patrick Troughton, and I love it. stunned silence. What, he likes the Grogan?
I think that was my first Patrick Troughton as well, because of it. The repeat in 1980.
81. Yeah, it would have been for me as well. Yeah, that's the thing. There's very much a generation for whom that Five Faces season was a real eye opener into the past of Doctor Who, I think. And
I think when they announced it, you almost wanted to weep, because I mean, for all of us who'd grown up sort of with just the things like the making of book and the monster book and the novelizations, for that announcer to say, "Oh, and in November we are going to be showing, old Doctor Who episodes," was kind of like mind-boggling. I mean, I know we've talked about this before, that you went to conventions, so maybe you saw, you'd seen episodes before. But this, for me, literally was the first chance I ever got, and it was astonishing.
Well, no, the first convention I went to would have been in 1984. So
much later.
Yeah, and even then, the sort of video rooms didn't have access to a huge amount of stuff, because it was very much, what the mates in that group had. So I remember going to the Leisure Hive convention and watching like the Sea Devils and the Mind Robber, and then coming back the next year and watching the Sea Devils and the Mind Robber again.
You see, that's the thing. Now, in my mind, these conventions were always terribly official, and it was always, the original film prints. It was always, you were showing pristine.
Oh no!
So it wasn't like that. There was someone's done bookie video.
This was a portable telly and a video recorder. It literally was.
That does surprise me. There you go. Wow.
Yeah, but this was an independent group. This wasn't a DWAS convention. This was just a group of fans who basically hired a hotel in Swindon. Possibly a little before your time, Paul. I'm not sure. You didn't do the Swindon ones, did you?
No. Although my earliest convention was 83, but that was the long lead one, so it doesn't really count.
Did you sit in the video room then and watch?
No, I don't, because I was only 10, so I'm not sure I'd have been allowed to wander off into a big crowd by myself to do that anyway.
Because I think they showed the Dominators there.
It was more of that was more of an exhibition to me than it was taking part in the. Because I probably wasn't even 10. I was probably 9. So.
Wow. Taking a young boy to show him the Dominators at that age.
That'll be the same.
But is it true that there are certain sets of Doctor Who stories that you just fall back on? I mean, you've got the whole range to choose from, but if you're asked to choose one in a hurry, does your hand automatically go to a small group of stories, do you think?
Well, mine did. I used to always default to Legopolis Castrovalva for some reason. For a very long time, they would be the two I would go to. I wanted to watch. My other one was Deadly Assassin.
Any particular reason? Or?
No, I suppose I had fond memories of it. And again, it was that thing. You might have only had an hour and a half free. I mean, the four-parters were always the ones I sort of defaulted to. But they're the ones I always enjoyed. Deadly Assassin, it's obviously that would get Mary Whitehouse spinning. But no, I really did. I enjoy that third episode, all on film.
Because I always think that Deadly Assassin Part 3 has got a very nice parallel with The Invisible Enemy Part 3 in the next season. And that you've got a single episode where the Doctor's in a very weird environment, but just for that episode. I
must admit, I'd never thought about that.
There's just a nice weird parallel there. That the Doctor's sent into another world, basically, just for that Part 3. Just a thought.
That's a Bob and Dave, isn't it?
Yeah, Bob Baker, Dave Martin. Yeah.
So I've just realised that the 3 I watched last week were all Bobs.
Bob Baker and Bob Holmes, yeah.
Yeah, I just not made that connection. Wow. Yeah, I had made other connections, but we don't talk about that. So,
but then, Paul, you like a good Bob as well, don't you? Because I know you're very fond of Seeds of Doom.
Yeah, Seeds. I also think I tend to, if you're talking about ones you just go for, I tend to go for. I think it's just because of becoming a horror fan as well. I tend to go for the ones with that are the most scary as well, because I want that bit of that scary. Dose of scare. So Seeds of Doom, Image of the Fendal is a big favourite because of the that is a sort of horror film in its own right. Things like Earthshock, which the first episode is so great from that point of view, and I mean the whole thing is full of shock moments and jumps and scares and stuff.
Do you think those choices would change if the entire catalogue was available, including absolutely everything? Do you think you would still go for the same ones?
I think I would, because I don't think that anything that's missing provides me with the. Although Fury from the Deep, if there's lots of the tiny bits that exist. I like to think that there'd be other bits, but that are just as scary or more scary. But I don't know.
It just fascinates me to think that if something like The Abominable Snowman turned up, and we'd all be totally excited because all 6 episodes of The Abominable Snowman turn up, and then would we actually get to the point where people are actually now bored of watching The Abominable Snowman? It goes. Sort of people's sort of nature tends to go from anticipation. Oh, I've seen that. I'd want to watch something else. And I just wonder, whether that excitement of still being able to watch Tomb of the Cybermen, for example, is still there for people.
Yeah, I don't know when I last watched Tomb, so I think that's passed for me. Not that I wouldn't go back and watch it. I just haven't in about 20 years, probably.
Well, I grew up in an era where there were only 5 complete Troughton stories, and then there were 6. And I know all the effort that's been put into the animations, everything. I still feel it's not quite the same. I like them, I enjoy them, but in many ways it's not quite the same as the original turning up. But I just wonder whether you get there's a kind of fatigue from. Do people now go, oh yeah, Enemy of the World, seen that?
I think I've said before that I don't get as excited by black and white stories, but the case when that was the reverse was when Web and Enemy of the World were found, and I didn't have that good internet then, but I couldn't believe when I talked to people who said, "Oh, I'm waiting for the DVD." In 2 months' time or something, and I was sitting there trying to get one episode downloaded so I could watch it before I went to bed, because they literally said, "Oh, it's on iTunes now," and that's the most exciting thing I can think of. That was before the 50th anniversary, so there was that moment where I couldn't. I was like, "You what? You waited 2 months, but it's here now." I can't believe you're waiting.
What was the one from? Is it Galaxy 4? That turned up and didn't get released for 3 years or something. I
think Galaxy 4 came out fairly quickly, because that was on the Aztecs disc, wasn't it? I think it was the Underwater Menace episode 2,
right?
Because there was a lot of humming and hawing about whether to do a proper telesnap recon and things like that, and certainly that's one of the few episodes I can remember wondering when I was going to see it, because of course Tomb was really rushed through, wasn't it? Tomb was such a sort of secret operation that
and the extra master plan episode as well, that sort of was quite quickly.
That was quite quick, although I did actually see an unofficial copy first, I'll admit that. That one did escape into the wild before it was officially out there, but But in terms of other series, are there comfort episodes of other series that you go back on? Because I'm a big Dad's Army fan, and I don't go for the obvious ones really with Dad's Army. I go for things like sort of A. Wilson Manager, which is quite a nice character one for Wilson, because I always like a good Wilson episode. So what?
I'm a bit strange with Dad's Army. I mean, I have the not quite complete box set, whatever it's called nowadays. You know, the one with that was out but had the audio but doesn't have the animation on it or something. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Was the one that they re-released it with the animation?
Yeah.
And I kind of I watched it all the way through when I got it, but it's not something I go and grab off the shelf. You know, I mean, it's one of Dad's Army is one of those shows that if it happens to be on the television, I will sit down and I'll get drawn into it, which happens to be a lot. But actually, I don't sort of necessarily just pop upstairs and grab it off the shelf. You know?
I mean, certainly when it comes to something like Sapphire and Steel, my hand is automatically drawn to Story 4. It just is, because it is, I think, partially that 4-part thing as well that you said. That, you know, good as, you know, many of the other stories are, I think Story 4 is like concentrated Sapphire and Steel. You know, sort of add water to taste. You know, it's you know.
Well, I'm going through a strange phase at the moment, simply because there's so much on the shelf that I haven't got round to watching yet, that I'd rather go and get something new off the shelf than go through something that's, you know, kind of overly familiar, if you like. Really, I don't really have that sort of comfort thing going on. I do have it with movies to a certain extent, but not so much with television. I tend to think, oh yeah, I'd like to talk. So I might want to do an article for you, so I'll go and grab it off the shelf. But I won't necessarily just sort of, you know, to entertain and sort of fill an evening. I don't generally just grab something off the shelf.
I think if going back to Sapphire and Steel, I think if you were going to plot the exciting bits of Story 4 compared to Story 6, which those are my two go-tos, but I think I'd go to 6 more than 4, because I think, as I say, if you were plotting all the bits I love of Story 4 tend to happen within the first 2 episodes, and then the last 2 episodes, there are moments, but they're not quite the same moments that I like. Whereas, of course, you're building to a crescendo, and you know in Story 6 that it's not going to end well. I think that's just going back to my dark side, really. my love for horror and sad endings.
Do you get a sort of strange memory sort of messing around with you thing going on though with certain things like that? I mean, I have this thing where I think something's a 4-parter and it turns out to be a 6-parter, and sometimes the other way around. Some things I think was 6 episodes turns out to be only 4. Do you get that at all? Or is it just
I was quite good at remembering that sort of thing. Because the making of Doctor Who, you know, gave that listing of all the Doctor Who stories, and it used to say like 6 episodes in brackets. But I also remember, was it issue 50 of Doctor Who Monthly? There was a little poster they gave away with a complete list of the Hartnell, Troughton, Pertwee, Baker stories, with the stories and the number of episodes in brackets. So because I sort of didn't have so much information, I just remember staring at that and getting that into my head, you know, almost learning it as homework, because I felt I ought to. So yeah.
No, I just had a weird thing recently when we did Claudius, that I thought Claudius was 10 and it was 12, and I convinced myself it was only 10 episodes. So when I got the discs out, it's 12 of these. I'm going to have to find time to watch it. But in the same way with things like GBH and stuff, I thought it was 6, not 7. You know, and it's kind of weird that your memory, Edge of Darkness, you know, again wasn't. I thought it was a shorter serial than it turned out to be. You know, so it's just that thing. You know, again, I know you do your research and you find out, but it just surprises me sometimes that certain shows don't have as many of them as you thought there was. Even with things like Star Cops, you know, Star Cops should have been 10. It is only 9. You know, but for some reason your brain sort of mashes it up a bit. You know, with something like Blake 7, it's 13, 13, 13, 13. You know, but for something like All Creatures Great and Small, that season's got 40.
I mean,
and it throws.
Certainly, I think that's true with kids shows that you remember. Because they would just be repeated on a loop, wouldn't they? And then you like Bagpuss and Mr. Ben and things like that.
Oh well, yes. I mean but that's I imagine that's a different kind of memory because of you being a lot younger, and they just seem like they were on all the time. I mean, I've been for my sins, I dug out another early Tomorrow People this morning.
Oh, blimey!
I did the Medusa strain this morning. Because I'd watched this. Is it the Slaves of Jedediah?
We both watched that around the same time, didn't we?
Yes.
In fact, I've got the Tomorrow People episode guide in front of me because that for the same reason I was going to. Well, I don't want to just oversay what you might be about to say, but
no, I just dug it out this morning, and again, it was kind of like that. Jedediah had 5 episodes, which surprised me. Then this was 4, and then there's another 4, but quite a lot of the later ones are only 2 episodes, and but I kind of think, that's surprising. I mean, the one with the bubble skins, I always think of as being a 4-parter, and it isn't. Yeah,
because they sort of do in the first 2 seasons. There's a 5 and 2 4s, and then it goes to a 4 and then 3 3s, and then 3 and a 4, and then 2s. And then virtually everything is 2 to the end, except for the very final story.
I mean,
I know it's galloping inflation, isn't it? But
I do wonder sometimes whether is the case of Roger Price going, I can't be bothered.
Is that as a director?
I'll just make it 2. That'll do. But on the other hand, I quite like those 2-parters, the later ones. I mean, Achilles' heel, I know, is hilarious. It really, but for the right reasons.
But also in terms of that storytelling, that again, when you think about modern Doctor Who, it now tells those stories in about the same running time. So it's kind of it's not the worst thing to have a 2-part. You always felt a bit shortchanged with something like Black Orchid. You sort of feel, I've just got into this and it's over. But actually, sometimes it's the right length for a story. The story has nothing else to tell you. 2-parter is perfectly fine.
And also, like Ace of Wands did a lot of 3-parters, and 4-parters. I don't think anything goes over 4 parts on Ace of Wands. It's 3s and 4s, and one 2-parter.
Yeah, I mean, I know when sort of people sort of react to Doctor Who stuff for the first time, they often say about 6-parters, or that should have been a 4, or that should have been a 5. But I think if you talk to anybody sort of planning those seasons at the time, it's the case of, we can only afford to do 5 stories. So how do you divide up 26 episodes?
Yeah.
It is very much practicality. And you make the story last as long as it needs to.
I really like Invasion, which is 8 parts. I really like that story. I don't feel it out. I know some people think it's padded, but I really like the fact that you've engaged with the characters and you get to stay with them for a few weeks. I like that aspect of the longer stories. That you don't just introduce somebody and then bump them off.
It's interesting that
I
think a lot of the longer Doctor Who stories are actually supported by the fact you've got some damn good directors working on them. So like you've got Camfield on the Invasion, but he also does Dalek Master Plan, and even the War Games. David Maloney, I think, really helps that story. To be 10 parts. 'Cause I can
keep the energy going.
I can imagine under some other directors it would definitely outstay its welcome. But I don't mind the War Games at a 10-parter at all. I know Terence Dix was always a bit down on it, but I think it works.
Again, it's a favourite, but I mean, the sort of 8-part, 10-part Troughton seem to be perfectly acceptable to me. I mean, War Games, when I had it on 2 videotapes, was in many ways, when I lived on my own, that was my bank holiday Monday viewing. I would just, that was it. What are you going to do today? I know I'll watch the War Game.
How do you feel about Pertwee's first season with those 7-parters? Because some people again find them too long, but certainly when it comes to something like the Solarians, I think that story occupies 7 episodes very nicely.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you can tell really because it's a big relaunch, isn't it? new producer, new actor, new slot, new colour, all this kind of thing, and you think that they've really sort of, they know where the money's going. They know they can only do 4 stories, and they make. I mean, what would you have had? 6 parts for Spearhead and 6 parts for the others? How would you have redistributed that? I don't think Spearhead needs to be longer than 4, but equally, I think when I sit and watch the Silurians, I think it's absolutely spot on. I mean, you get that second story of the plague thing coming in from about episode 5, don't you? Which kind of gives the story a nudge and carries it through to the end.
And Inferno keeps busy, and it's also one of the stories that gets most mentioned of his era, so it can't be a failure.
I mean, if any of them feel flabby, it's Ambassadors, isn't it? Really. But I mean, maybe it's because we were not all as familiar with it, because it was quite late released, and was difficult to get hold of for a very long time. I mean, I'm sure it has its supporters, but it's not one I would immediately go for, but that's just me. But I actually found it quite. I mean, it's funny because I quite like a lot of gritty 70s, crime thrillers, but for some reason, the Ambassadors, it feels slightly out of place.
But then recently, when I was still commuting into work, I downloaded. I'd already downloaded quite a lot of Who to just have on my phone, but I hadn't really. They were sitting there, and I hadn't really watched them for a while. But I got back into it, and I was watching an episode a day, and then I downloaded a few more. And the weird thing is, I tended to download stories that I hadn't seen for a long time because it was nice to watch. The opposite to what we were saying about the ones we turn to, the ones I don't turn to. It was nice to see them again because I wouldn't say I was watching them as if I'd never seen them before, but I certainly couldn't tell you what was happening in the next scene. Things like the mutants and things like that I've not watched for a long time.
It's nice to be surprised.
And also I don't know who chose the stories that they make available on iTunes, because it's not a comprehensive collection, although they seem to be slowly releasing some of the Blu-ray box sets almost in digital format now. But the ones that were released when they first started releasing them in that format are a right mixture. Or they have like the best of Colin Baker, and it's got Time Lash, but no Revelation of the Daleks. I mean, it's probably
when you've only got 8 stories. Top 10s are difficult.
Yeah, but I don't think Twin Dilemma or Time Lash is anyone's best of Colin Baker, especially when they left a few out. But maybe that was for rights reasons.
Well, I suppose you could argue it's in his top 20 stories on telly.
Yeah. But most of the box sets only had of the best tops only had 6 stories.
I'd have to check, but I think I've got Ambassadors of Death as an audio book as well, haven't I? As an audio, when they had when they released them with the scenes description, with those kinds of audio books, the soundtrack audios. I think they did do a few Pertwees in that, and so I suspect I'm more familiar with it nowadays with whoever was the person who was doing the narration on it.
I've never asked either of you this. Have you done the Everything in Order Doctor Who marathon, starting at an earthly child and just working your way through to Survival?
Well, I haven't, because I've never seen a recon for a start. Right. When I used to buy the videotapes, I did do an all the way through watch of what was available on videotape, but I would, for some reason, I would always start at Robot. I've got form with starting at season 4 or 4th of things. I don't know why. I do it with MASH as well. I start at season 4, and I do it with Doctor Who. I start with Tom Baker's first series, so series 12, and then go through to the end, and then go back to the beginning and work my way back. It's one of those things. I don't know.
It's a bit too organised for me. I think if I had a partner or a friend who we had a Doctor Who watching night, and we came over to each other's houses and we watched, or as I say, we had a partner who wanted to watch it as well, then maybe otherwise for my own taste it's a bit too organised, and don't think I could keep to it. But I know a lot of people do.
I mean, we did it starting in November 2003. Basically, as a lead into the new series, we sort of worked out that if you did one episode a night and allowing for a bit of wiggle room, we'd get towards the end of it as the first Eccleston series started, and we did manage to keep to it. For the missing stuff, we just did the CDs.
Oh.
It was an interesting experiment, and if you ever want to do it, it does give you an overview about how things fit into the show. Because I always like sort of spotting when people start this on YouTube, and they very rarely get very far. It must be admitted, but I always like pointing out. No, Hartnell's not got a sonic screwdriver, and it's going to be a long time before you get to that, because people go into old Doctor Who assuming that everything's in place, and it's not. So much of it is just made up on the spot to deal with a crisis. So
I feel like if I was going to do it, I would do it backwards, like I did with UFO. I'd start with the last semester story and work backwards, because I don't think I could get through so much black and white. Not by myself anyway. I when I last watched a lot of Hartnell, and I did it with other Doctor Who fans that I used to know in London, and we'd have a bottle of wine, and so you'd be joking as well with it. But when you're by yourself, maybe it's too. You have to really be in the right mood, and I think I need to be a bit drunk to watch old Doctor,
watch William,
to watch 60s Doctor Who, or at least William, particularly William.
Oh, bless him.
There's nothing wrong. I mean, I'm happy to have a bottle of wine and watch some Hartnell.
I think the thing that sometimes surprises me about many shows, though, actually, is when you start watching the early episodes again. Sometimes people suddenly look 20 years younger, and that's quite surprising in itself. But it's that sense that everything's in place quite early on for a lot of shows. You don't get that kind of evolution. Sometimes you actually think, oh gosh, that was actually there right from day one. That part of the format which you thought kind of sort of developed over time. No, they were doing that in episode 1. The pilot, they had all these elements in place.
I mean,
I'm trying to think of an example now.
I mean, Martin, you've obviously done quite a lot of episode 1 articles for it, because that was your first sort of when you sort of submitted.
Oh, yes. The first hornet's nest I was poking my stick into.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So you did like the first episode of Young Ones, the first episode of the Black Adder, and
yes,
as you say, although shows do evolve. I mean, Black Adder's a good example, isn't it? That each season is different, and the first season is more different than the rest, because Blackadder's almost like the fall guy, isn't he? Later on, he becomes much more the hero, and Baldrick becomes much more stupid.
Well, I mean, that's the big switch, isn't it? The Baldrick is the clever one in the first series, isn't it? And never again. Peak Baldrick was in the medieval era.
Of course, I was thinking Dark Shadows is one of those shows where fandom, or whatever you want to call it, actively encourages people to start about 200 episodes in if they don't want to, if they're sort of unsure about watching. I mean, there's quite a lot going on in the early episodes. There are some ghosts and a phoenix, and lots of sort of machinations in the first before Barnabas Collins arrives. I'm kind of glad that when I first saw it, I saw it from the start before he turned up.
But it's like a game changer, that's the thing, that can actually change a show forever. But what surprises me sometimes is this sense that certain shows, they really, even some sitcoms, how much of the elements are in place It does surprise me sometimes, because you just don't really think. You think, these writers are a lot cleverer than we give them credit for sometimes. That actually that was there right from day one. If you know where to look for it.
I mean, do you think attempts to give Doctor Who a Bible are always due to fail? But I'm thinking of the Paul McGann proposed series. Are you familiar with that document about?
The regeneration book.
Yeah, I am Cardinal Barusa spelt wrong, and all that stuff. Yeah,
I can understand why you'd do it, especially if you were setting up an American series in a writer's room. I can understand exactly why you would need to explain to people who hadn't grown up with the series, what this is, what that is, and all that kind of thing. What actually still grates with me is this feeling, and it seems to become more prevalent, is that people want to fill in all the gaps. And I quite like the gaps. I quite like the gaps to be vague. I don't need all the answers to join all these dots. In many ways, I'd rather they weren't joined. I'd rather, it was just still mysterious, because that gives you the space for your own imagination to put in what you want. And I feel sometimes that the minute you've got a definitive answer to what happened, after Better Be Liz 3, after the spiders left or whatever, and that becomes canonical, you can't mess with it anymore. You can't, you can't go back there. You can't sort of, move around and have any more fluidity. You've got this definitive answer, and sometimes I feel, why do you need an answer to what that painting was on Carfell? Talking about Time Lash. Why would you need to know what that adventure was? Sometimes it's just more interesting not to have an answer.
I don't think it bothers me that much, but I think then, I also have that background of liking long-running series, like sort of soap operas, for want of a better name, where you don't get all the answers because you never know if that character might be coming back, or and you might not know that when they're
that's the thing
on.
Isn't it? You actually find out sometimes. I mean, even in sitcoms, they'll mention a brother in the first episode, and then suddenly that character turns up 8 years later, and then you watch the pilot and you go, oh yeah, he did have a brother, rather than that thing where everybody in their family has been bumped off,
Well, that.
I think the opposite happens in Dynasty, where Blake and Alexis had 2 children. Oh no, they had 3 children. Oh, actually, there was a 4th child. Oh no, we had another one over here.
Well, maybe they just forgot. It was a busy day. Put it on a bus to Durham.
Probably the lead in the lead on the paint.
Left it in the pub.
Well, I was going to say, with a link to The Invisible Enemy, old Mr. Grace does actually get mentioned in the very pilot episode of Are You Being Served? Because there's the joke. Young Mr. Grace comes in, and he's ancient, and they say old Mr. Grace doesn't get out much these days. And it's only when young Mr. Grace is too old to actually be in the show anymore that you get old Mr. Grace. So they fall back on what was a joke like sort of 6 years ago.
Yeah. And you've also got these ones where you've got this ancient character, and they sort of go, "Oh, well, I'll go and visit my mother."
Well, that's it. You do have Jones's dad in the first series of Dad's Army.
That's what I mean. It's and there was another one we're watching this week that had the same kind of exactly the same joke. You've got this ancient character, and then you go, "Oh, just go and see the mother." What?
But there we are. I think we'll leave it there then, as we're coming up to 2:00 on my clock. I can see it over there.
I didn't even get halfway through my
well, then we can carry on. That's fine. We know we can. So for the moment, we'll say thank you to Paul. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to Martin.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.